In 1990, a young boy in Mexico was watching cartoons around midnight when the broadcast was interrupted by a slideshow of nearby missing people. One in particular stuck out. Her name was Celine Delgado Lopez, and children all across Mexico reported that her photo caused a sense of dread and uneasiness, causing her to become an urban legend of sorts. Despite this, no information was found on her and there were no updates on her case until about 20 years later. The same young boy, who is now a young adult, was scrolling Twitter when a weird video came up from Canal 5's account, the same channel that broadcasted the infamous Celine Delgado photo 20 years ago. It was simply captioned Celine, with no other details. Most people believe that Canal 5 was simply posting old creepy videos as a publicity stunt, but this only made the Celine Delgado case more famous. After this, many people began spreading more pictures and rumors, such as the infamous Facebook hoax, where people claimed that a user named Celine Delgado Lopez was suddenly appearing in everyone's friends list. Even though most of the rumors and photos spread after the initial broadcast have been proven to be hoaxes, what truly happened to Celine Delgado remains a mystery and likely always will.
These are the shocking photographs that a nurse took with dead patients. She was then accused of murdering 38. This is the case of Italy's so-called Angel of Death. It was spring 2014 in Italy. 42-year-old Daniela Poggiali was working at a hospital after qualifying as a nurse in 1995. She said that she got the job initially because she loved working in busy environments with a lot of people. However, the hospital she was working at started to see an alarming amount of deaths, similar to the cases of Beverly Allitt and also Lucy Letby. Suspicions around the hospital were growing due to them having over 100 deaths in just 2 years. Now, Daniela was no stranger to controversy at work. She'd made numerous enemies among her colleagues. Some said she'd given patients sleeping pills so she had an easier shift. Now, Daniela put this down to just gossipers and people being jealous of her at work. She claimed there was no truth to it, but then the accusations got even more disturbing. In 2013, there were 27 incidents of theft in the hospital. Daniela was reported for this. She was found guilty of trying to steal the wallet of a man who had simply gone into the hospital to visit his sick wife. She was also found guilty of stealing medication and food. Between March and April 2014, there were 6 deaths under her watch. One of these was a patient called Rosa. Rosa had actually come into the hospital with a non-life-threatening condition. She should have just been able to be discharged after a couple of days. However, after being treated by Daniela, she started having convulsions and died. Medications were unaccounted for and the hospital reported this to police. Daniela was suspended from work. She was soon charged with Rosa's death. The story was headline news, along with some disturbing photos that police had found on Daniela's phone. These were pictures of her smiling and posing next to deceased patients. Now, investigators believed that Rosa was one of potentially 38 victims that were murdered by Daniela. She was charged with murder and was found guilty, and she was given life in prison, but that's far from the end of this story. Daniela served just 1 year in prison before being acquitted. She maintains her innocence in this case and states that this was simply a witch hunt. So what do you believe? Let me know in the comments. After this woman vanished for 2 years, it was actually Google Street View that solved the mystery. Paulette Landrieu was 83 years old from Belgium. She was a mother of 4 and her family were understandably confused and heartbroken when she vanished. It was the 2nd of November 2020 and nothing of any significance had happened to explain her disappearance. She was living in Andenne in Belgium and police were stumped. Even after a really large-scale search, including helicopters with thermal cameras, she was still nowhere to be seen. They started working on a theory that maybe she had fallen into the local river, but after a search nothing was found. The case went cold and nobody seemed to have any idea what had happened to the well-loved pensioner. This was until one officer decided to try and trace her last steps. He decided to get a better idea of the geography of the local area by using Google Street View. As luck would have it, he actually came across images of Paulette. Cameras captured her crossing the road leading to one of her neighbours' houses. Luckily, Google Maps had captured several still images of Paulette. Police decided to search the scene and went to the neighbour's house that had been captured in the pictures. Paulette was found deceased lying on an embankment, presumably having fallen in a tragic accident. She was only meters away from her home. It isn't clear why police hadn't found her originally or searched that neighbour's house and why the neighbour hadn't seen her themselves. Thankfully though, her family do now have some closure on this case and she has been finally able to be laid to rest. Can you accidentally stab someone to death with a kitchen knife? Teresa Hansen and her husband Paul were a couple from West Cowick in East Yorkshire. They were apparent childhood sweethearts and had met in the 1980s and been inseparable ever since. It was 2022 and Paul was 55, working as a construction manager. Teresa was 54. Now the couple did have children together, including their adult son Ryan. Just after Christmas that year, the couple had been reportedly arguing. Paul had been drinking quite a lot more than usual over the festive season, and Teresa wasn't happy about this. She decided to broach the subject with him while she was cooking one day. Teresa claimed that she was chopping onions for a dish she was making when he came into the kitchen on the 28th of December. She said he was verbally abusive to her, which wasn't out of the ordinary. He was calling her names and was saying to throw the effing dinner in the bin. She stated that he was getting more and more irate with her, and when she turned around, he walked into the knife that she was holding. The knife went into Paul's heart, and in a panic, Teresa called 999. She attempted to cover the wound over and save him, but tragically he died from blood loss. At Teresa's trial, the judge actually stated to Teresa that he believed she didn't intend to kill her husband. However, he did state that he does believe that she intended to hurt him. He said that she experienced a moment of violence. Teresa and Paul's children pleaded with the judge to be lenient with their mother, but she was jailed for life. This model was murdered in Croydon, and what her killer said in court will make your blood boil. Sally Ann Bowman was born in 1987 in Carshalton in South London. She had 3 sisters and was very talented and attended the Brit School for Performing Arts and Technology in Croydon. As you can see, she was very beautiful and she had dreams of becoming a professional model. After leaving school, she worked as a part-time hairdresser and tried to make it as a model. In 2005, she joined Pulse Model Agency. She actually became the face of Swatch watches. Her career was going from strength to strength, and it looked like all her dreams were about to come true. That was until the 24th of September 2005. Sally was 18 at this point and was starting to go on nights out. On the night in question, she was out with her sister and a group of friends. They went to Lloyd's Bar in Croydon and stayed there until around 1 a.m. Now CCTV captured her leaving the bar and she waited around 15 minutes outside for a taxi. She then contacted her ex-boyfriend Lewis Sproston, who offered to pick her up. The pair initially broke up due to accusations of them both cheating. However, that night Lewis picked her up from Croydon town centre around 2:20 a.m. He drove her to her house in Bynheim Crescent. Unfortunately, in their car they got into another argument about the cheating rumours, and Lewis actually sped off at around 4 a.m. as Sally got out of the car. Shortly after this, neighbours reportedly heard screaming but didn't actually go outside to see what was going on. Sally Ann lay outside having been stabbed in the neck and stomach. She was AR'd as she lay dead or dying. Her belongings were stolen, including her cardie, her bag and her phone. She was found deceased next to her home, and police initially thought that Lewis was to blame. He was arrested and held for 4 days until finally DNA evidence eliminated him as a suspect. It wasn't until 9 months later this man was arrested. This was 35-year-old Croydon man Mark Dixie. Police had luckily managed to swab Mark 2 weeks earlier for having been involved in a brawl in a pub where he worked as a chef. The DNA they collected matched the DNA on Sally Ann. In court, Mark would admit to R-ing her after finding her on the ground outside her house. He denied murdering her though. Infuriatingly, he said he did not realise she was dead or dying when he found her. He was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 34 years. Frustratingly, it was actually then revealed that Mark was already a convicted serial S offender. He'd obviously been free to kill Sally Ann. He's unlikely to be considered for parole until at least 2040 when he's around 70. After this girl was interviewed about her missing friend, she also went missing. 12-year-old Ashley Pond and 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis were school friends from Oregon. It was 8 a.m. on the 9th of January 2002, and Ashley was actually running late for school that day. The bus stop was 10 minutes from her home, but tragically that day, she never made it to school. Her mum would raise the alarm when she got home and realised Ashley wasn't there. She called the school to be told that Ashley had never turned up that day at all. Now, Ashley was a well-liked girl who was involved in the school's swim and dance teams. Everyone figured she had no real reason to run away of her own accord. Search and rescue teams were deployed in the local area. News crews were around, obviously interviewing locals about the missing girl. Ashley's friend Miranda was interviewed on the news about the disappearance of her friend. Months passed by with no news until the 8th of March, when chillingly Miranda would vanish too. Again, this was at around 8 AM on her way to the bus stop. In a remarkably similar turn of events, Miranda's mum came home, discovered that she wasn't there, rang the school to be again told that she hadn't turned up. The local community was horrified that these girls, both similar in age and appearance, had vanished from the same place at a similar time of day within just months of each other. Clearly this was no coincidence. The trail went frustratingly cold until a breakthrough. On August the 13th, Ward Weaver's son rang police. He stated that his dad had tried to his 19-year-old girlfriend. He stated his dad had also confessed to murdering the 2 schoolgirls. Now, Ward apparently knew the girls because they were friends with his 12-year-old daughter. Investigators searched his home and found the remains of the girls on his property. Ashley was buried under a slab of concrete. Ward had a history of violence against women, and shockingly, Ashley had even reported him for trying to her. Infuriatingly, police had never investigated this. Ward would plead guilty to the murders and got 2 life sentences without parole. Interestingly, his stepson was convicted of murder in 2014 for killing a substance dealer. Ward's dad was also placed on death row for murdering 2 people. This photo helped solve one of the most disturbing crimes Kent has ever seen. This is the chilling case of the British hospital worker who murdered 2 and abused over 100 corpses. It was 1987. David Fuller worked as an electrician at the Tunbridge Wells Hospital in Pembury, which is just a short drive from London. To his colleagues and the patients at the hospital, he seemed like a normal guy. They had no ideas of the horrors that were going on behind closed doors. Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce were 2 local women in their 20s. Although they didn't know each other, their lives drew parallels. They were both hard workers with many friends, and they both were living in bedsits in the area. Wendy had recently become single after her marriage broke down. This was incredibly heartbreaking for her, as she really wanted to settle down and have children. She started dating again, but on the night of the 22nd of June, her boyfriend dropped her off at home and would never see her alive again. She was found the next day, nude and covered in blood. She'd been SA'd and strangled to death. Shortly after this tragedy, Caroline went home after her shift at a restaurant. Neighbours heard screams coming from her home, and then she vanished. 3 weeks later, her body was found by a horrified tractor driver. She was again nude and had been dumped in a drainage ditch. Now, these 2 murders were remarkably similar, and the media dubbed them the bedsit murders. Frustratingly, due to lack of technology and a lack of eyewitnesses, these cases quickly went cold. Investigators did collect fingerprints and DNA from both crime scenes. However, there were no matches on the DNA database when they checked them. It wasn't until years later, when technology had advanced, that they did get a breakthrough. They were able to identify David as a likely suspect through something called familial DNA, which is basically when they look at your family DNA. Police found that David had a history of burglaries in the 70s. By 2020, he was married to his 3rd wife and had a teenage son. Officers were just about ready to make a move and question David. Upon questioning, he denied any knowledge of the girls, and he also denied ever being in those local areas, but police proved this to be a lie. He had hundreds of diary entries that proved he had been even to the restaurant where one of the girls worked. One photo they found in this house was absolutely vital. It showed him lying on his front with trainers with a very significant print on the bottom. Police managed to match the soles of the shoes with the bloody footprint found at the scene. Now, they were overjoyed that they'd seemingly found this double killer. However, they were about to find something really disturbing that no one expected. David had hoarded multiple computers and hard drives, and a couple of hard drives were actually fastened to the back of one of the set of drawers that he owned. There was a reason that these were concealed. They were videos of David inside the hospital mortuary. In these videos, he was filming himself SAing deceased patients. These were people ranging from all ages up to over 85. He also had hundreds of child SA images on his computers. For more than 3 decades, David had got away with these abhorrent crimes. He was given a lifetime prison sentence and will thankfully never be free again. This man shot and killed a child abuser on TV. Gary Plauché lived in Louisiana. He had an 11-year-old son called Jody. Between 1983 and 1984, Jody was having karate lessons. Unfortunately for Jody, however, he was having lessons with 25-year-old Jeffrey Doucet. Jeffrey was a child abuser and had been essaying Jody for the duration of the time he was supposed to be teaching him karate. In a dramatic turn of events, he ended up on Valentine's Day 1984 kidnapping Jody. He held the young boy at a motel in Anaheim, California, where he used the time to do unspeakable things to the child. Police eventually tracked down the disgusting man and innocent child after Jeffrey had allowed Jody to bring his mum from the motel. Police raided the motel room, rescued the young boy and arrested the man. On March the 1st, Jody was reunited with his relieved family, but after Jody's dad heard what had happened to his son, he was enraged. He was interviewed on TV and said how helpless he felt. A couple of weeks later, on March the 16th, Jeffrey was flown back to Louisiana to face trial. He arrived at the airport with officers who walked him through handcuffed at around 9:30 p.m. Little did he know, Gary was about to take the ultimate revenge. Gary was tipped off by news crews as to when Jeffrey would arrive, and he waited for him with a handgun. He hung around wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses so that he wouldn't be recognised. As Jeffrey was escorted through the airport, Gary fired a shot into his head at point-blank range. Jeffrey fell into a coma and died the next day. Gary was initially charged with second-degree murder, but agreed to a plea bargain and was charged with manslaughter. He got a 7-year suspended sentence with 5 years probation and 300 hours of community service. His defense team argued that he was driven to temporary psychosis after hearing what happened to his son. The judge ruled that sending him to prison wouldn't help anyone, and there was virtually no risk of him committing another crime. When he was 67, he did an interview stating he did not regret killing him and would do it again. He sadly had a stroke and passed away in 2014 in a nursing home, aged 68.
This might be the most intriguing true crime case for me personally, and one that I think you guys are going to find extremely interesting. If you're not already familiar with the staircase case of Michael and Kathleen Peterson, sit down and relax, or get up and clean your room, because we're going to be here for a while. Michael and Kathleen Peterson are the two people that we are going to be discussing today, and they were said to have the perfect marriage. They were soulmates, they lived in this big, beautiful house, they were really living this fairy tale life, until December 9th, 2001, around 2:40 a.m., Michael Peterson called 911 to report that he found his wife Kathleen lying at the bottom of their staircase. Michael is absolutely frantic on the 911 call. He's begging them, please get here soon. He's saying that his wife had fallen down the staircase and she was unconscious. Oddly enough, on the 911 call, Michael never mentions the amount of blood that is at the scene, which is the first thing that the first responders noticed when they got there, and tragically, by the time that the first responders did get there, Kathleen was already gone. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it for you guys. The amount of blood that was at this scene, it was an insanely large amount of blood for a woman just simply falling down the staircase. And there is photos online, there's crime scene photos. Typically, I tell you guys not to look at crime scene photos, but if you guys want to, I do think it's important to understand the gravity of the amount of blood that was at this scene. It was said that there was over 10,000 blood splatters on the staircase and on the walls. The police on the scene were really suspicious of Michael immediately for more reasons than one. For one thing, Michael's story of events that night is kind of unbelievable. He says that him and his wife Kathleen sat down and they watched a movie, and the movie ended around 11 p.m. The two of them went outside to share some wine by the pool, and then sometime around midnight or before midnight, Kathleen went inside, and then Michael stayed outside for about 2 or 3 hours alone. But it was December, and it was nighttime, and he was only wearing a t-shirt and shorts, which is, I don't know, kind of weird to be sitting outside for 2 to 3 hours in the cold in just a t-shirt, but I digress. He then says that he went inside around 2:30, 2:40 in the morning, where he found his wife lying at the bottom of the staircase before calling 911. It's an odd timeline for sure, but even more suspicious was the blood. Yes, there was an abnormally large amount of blood at this scene for someone who has just fallen down the stairs. But there was also blood found inside of Michael's shorts that he was wearing. A bloody footprint was also found on Kathleen's sweatpants that matched one of Michael's shoes, but he says that he was barefoot for the entire night. And probably the second most suspicious piece of evidence in this case is after the police did a luminol test. I'm sure you guys know what luminol is, but if you don't, it's a chemical that will show where blood has been, even if someone attempts to clean it up. The tests showed that someone tracked bloody footprints throughout the house, into the kitchen, to the sink, to the washing machine, and then attempted to clean it up. And I say that this is only the second most suspicious thing because I'm going to share with you guys the most suspicious thing ever in just a minute. But first, let's talk about Kathleen's autopsy. The autopsy showed that Kathleen had 7 deep lacerations to her head, and the medical examiner said that this was likely caused by being hit over the head repeatedly by an object. Also, there was cartilage in Kathleen's neck that was fractured, likely by strangulation, and with this, Kathleen's cause of death was determined to be a homicide. And if you're not already extremely suspicious of Kathleen's husband, Michael, what if I told you this was not the first time a woman close to Michael was found dead at the bottom of a staircase? Years before Michael and Kathleen met and got married, he was living in Germany with his first wife, and the two of them had a very close friend, a single mother named Elizabeth Ratliff. The last time that Elizabeth was ever seen alive, she had dinner at Michael's house, and then after dinner, Michael walked Elizabeth home. Later that night, Michael was seen by Elizabeth's neighbor running away from Elizabeth's house, and the very next morning, Elizabeth was found dead, lying at the bottom of her staircase, in an eerily similar way to the way that Kathleen was found. Blood everywhere and deep lacerations to the back of her head. And after Elizabeth died, Michael actually adopted Elizabeth's 2 daughters, left his wife, and then took Elizabeth's 2 daughters and moved back to the United States, which is kind of weird. At first, Elizabeth's death was ruled as an accident, and Michael never mentioned this when his wife was found dead the exact same way. I'm assuming since it happened in Germany, in another country, he was hoping that no one would ever find out. It actually wasn't until Elizabeth's sister heard the news that Michael's wife died the exact same way that her sister did, and he was the last one to see both of them alive. So she alerted the authorities, and they actually exhumed Elizabeth's body to do an autopsy, and it was determined that Elizabeth's cause of death was not an accident. It was actually a homicide. So things are not looking good for Michael Peterson, and he was arrested for the murder of his wife, Kathleen. During the trial, the defense's story was that Kathleen had fallen while walking up the stairs, but then she fell back, hit her head, she tried to get up, slipped on her own blood, so she fell backwards again, she tried to get up, then she fell again, and she did that until she had the 7 head wounds. It sounds far-fetched, especially since if you fall walking up the stairs, your instinct is to fall forward and catch yourself. But they say that this is possible because Kathleen was drunk, that they were sharing wine that night. But Kathleen actually had so little alcohol in her system that she would have passed a breathalyzer test and would have still been able to legally drive. And I'm sure you're wondering if there's a motive here. Why would Michael want to kill his wife, his soulmate? The prosecution actually had 2 possible motives. The one being financial. Michael and Kathleen were in debt. A lot of debt, actually. Upwards of $140,000 in debt. And Kathleen had a life insurance policy of nearly $2 million. But there's also another possible motive. Michael was having an affair with a man, actually. On Michael's computer, he had over 2,000 images of men. He had also been speaking online to a young male escort for about 4 months before Kathleen died, with plans of meeting up in person to pay for this escort's services. And the night that Kathleen died, she used Michael's computer, which she never did, but she had some work to do and she accidentally left her computer at the office. The prosecution's theory was that Kathleen found this, she confronted her husband, and Michael snapped. He was known to have a quick temper, and since he possibly had gotten away with murder once before, he would know exactly what to do. The prosecution even had a potential murder weapon. Well, kind of. Kathleen's injuries to her head lined up with a fireplace blowpoke, and Kathleen and Michael did have a custom-made, a really nice blowpoke that they had gotten from a gift from Kathleen's sister. And the night that Kathleen died, the blowpoke was missing, nowhere to be found. Ultimately, the jury did find Michael Peterson guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but this case does not end here. Michael has never been charged in the death of Elizabeth Ratliff, and her 2 daughters have stuck by their adoptive father Michael and have believed in his innocence to this day. And Michael, to this day, has maintained his innocence, and he spent 8 years in prison for killing his wife until it was determined that Michael did not get a fair trial and a judge awarded Michael a brand new trial. But instead of doing the entire trial again, Michael was given a plea deal, an Alford plea, which we've talked about Alford pleas before. It's a super rare kind of plea deal where you can plead guilty to something while still maintaining your innocence. And that's what Michael did. And then after taking this plea deal, Michael was released on time served. So today, Michael Peterson is a free man. This case is extremely controversial. There's a lot of people out there that think Michael Peterson got away with killing 2 women. But there's a lot of people out there that also think that Michael Peterson was innocent. There's also a lot of people out there that believe in the owl theory. Yes, there is a theory that an owl killed Kathleen Peterson. It seems far-fetched, but it's an interesting theory and there is some evidence that backs it up. The theory is that while Kathleen was still outside but walking to her home, an owl dive-bombed her, attacked her head, which is, I guess, something that owls do. I'm no owl expert, but apparently the injuries on Kathleen's head are similar to an owl's talon marks. And to escape this owl, Kathleen just ran into her home. She's not paying attention, and that's how she fell down the stairs. When Kathleen was found, inside of her hand was a clump of her own hair. There were also pine needles and some owl feathers, which would make sense. If an owl was attacking your head, you would just be pulling and grabbing to try and get it off. It's an interesting theory, and you guys are gonna have to tell me what you think. Personally, my gut just tells me that Michael is guilty. I just can't get over the fact that someone tried to clean up bloody footprints in the house, and also this happened to another woman in Michael's past. And he was also seen running from her house the day that it happened. Today, Michael Peterson is a free man, and this case remains a mystery.
Something absolutely horrific happened this Halloween. At around 11:15 p.m. on Thursday the 31st of October, a terrified call came into police. On the other end of the line, officers could hear a child's voice. She told authorities that her dad had been shot and killed at their home in Euston. Obviously, emergency services rushed to the scene and found the victim lying in a pool of blood on his garage floor. He had multiple gunshot wounds and was pronounced dead at the scene. The 2 children were inside of the house, and obviously, although they were completely traumatized, they were thankfully unharmed. There was actually a 3rd child who usually did live in that house, but this child was thankfully staying with a relative on that night. Now, there was no murderer anywhere to be seen and no clues left as to who could have committed this crime. Police knew that if they were to try and hunt down this killer, they needed to ask local neighbours whether they had any Ring doorbell footage. Luckily, some neighbours had captured some disturbing images. One appeared to have captured a figure walking in the area in a Michael Myers Halloween mask around the time of the murder. So who could have committed this horrific crime and why? A homicide investigation is currently underway, but police had some interesting information about another family member. The mother of the children, who was separated from the dad, who is the victim in this case, was also murdered back in August. They believe it's possible that these 2 killings are linked. The children are now in the custody of their nan, but it's absolutely horrific that these 3 kids have been left without a dad or a mum.